Bless Your Bones, America. I'm your host, the Right Reverend David Clark, and I'm more than happy to be here. And my prayer for you today is that God's blessing will be manifested in your life. Today I have invited a special guest to participate in the Drug Recovery Conference. From the law enforcement, we have Trooper Knox. We also have Dr. Dennis Daly, and we have Mr. O'Henry. Tonight, we'll be celebrating and honoring the unsung heroes. And we'll be talking today in the conference about family matters, combating against the opioid crisis, and technology matters in combating against the opioid crisis, and emergency technology, emergency combating against the opioid crisis. So we thank you for your time today, and I believe if you give your attention to these speakers, that you will benefit greatly. So let's receive Trooper Knox.
So you're the technician too?
Thank you, Reverend Clark. It's an honor to be here, and I truly appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and to your audience and distinguished guests and fellow speakers here today. My name is Trooper Gary Naughton with the Pennsylvania State Police. I'm assigned to the Bureau of Criminal Investigation's Drug Law Enforcement Division. I'm assigned to the Western Shield Unit, and I want to talk to you a little bit today at Reverend Clark's request about some of the technology that we use to interdict criminal activity that occurs on our highways and interstates within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I have a brief PowerPoint I'd like to share with you just to highlight some of the things that we look for when we go out onto the highways and we patrol. And we're cognizant of criminal activity that's afoot in the vehicles that we stop for traffic violations. And oftentimes people will ask me, what does it mean to do criminal interdiction, or what is criminal interdiction? By definition, it's to confront and halt the activities, advance, or entry of criminals and their activities into communities within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We do that by conducting traffic stops, and we have specialized training that allows us to detect those indicators of deception and indicators of criminal activity and follow up on those. And we discover everything from drug trafficking to the proceeds of criminal activity and seizing large amounts of United States currency that's involved in those transactions, fugitive apprehension, human trafficking on packed cigarettes, stolen vehicles, fraudulent credit cards. There are a number of victims out there that are unfortunately victimized by people that steal their identities. Burglaries, robberies, kidnap victims, terrorist watch list. You just really never know what you're going to encounter when you stop someone along the interstate. And here are just a couple of examples of what we seize. And obviously we know that criminals are the most vulnerable when they're in transit. When they're holed up in their residences or places of business, it's more difficult for law enforcement. But when they're on the interstates and on the highways, they're easier for us to interdict. And we do that by conducting traffic stops for violations of Title 75, which is our vehicle code, and Title 67, which are the inspection regs that we enforce for safety standards. And we patrol all the major interstates within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and oftentimes the criminal activity that we locate on our interstates comes from interstates all over the country that you see here. We seize large amounts of cocaine, heroin, and the biggest epidemic right now, obviously, is the opiate epidemic, and we seize a large amount of fentanyl. We seize a large amount of United States currency that you see here that's used to further those crimes. And unfortunately, as I mentioned, we do seize a large number of fraudulent credit cards that people are using to steal people's identities and really a detriment to society. They use very elaborate devices such as the Deftune encoder here that you see to embed information into the credit cards onto the magnetic strips. And these are all types of things, including weapons that we find during traffic stops that may be used to commit some very violent crimes at their ultimate destination. So we're very humbled and very happy when we interdict someone on their way to cause great harm to the members of our community. There are a lot of different tools that we use in criminal interdiction, and I can probably say that we have some of the best trained law enforcement officers in Pennsylvania that are assigned to do highway interdiction. We also train a large number of police officers to do highway interdiction. So one of the greatest tools we have is obviously our mind. We're constantly training and obtaining the most current drug smuggling and smuggling trends of all types in the country. And some of the more technologically advanced tools that we have here, obviously we have K9 Brutus here. He's a very well-trained narcotics detection canine that we use on a regular basis, as well as all of our other canines. There are a number of different tools that we use once we locate the contraband to identify exactly what it is. And the TrueNarc device is one of those that allows us to essentially aim a laser into a controlled substance. It chemically analyzes that, molecularly analyzes that, and tells us what that substance is without forcing us to be exposed to the fentanyl or whatever the hazardous material may be inside. It's a very valuable tool for us. We also use, in locating the contraband itself, we use a variety of different tools. One of them is this density meter. We know based on our training and experience that certain voids in spaces in vehicles should either be hollow or be filled, and we use this density meter that allows us to very unobtrusively scan this device over the top of the affected area or the area in question, and allows us to detect the density of that, and we're able to see what may be inside through the use of additional tools such as this scope that we use. If we do locate a false compartment in a vehicle, before we would use any of the more extensive tools to pry into that, we can use a scope and actually observe that on a small screen here and know that it's contraband before we get very invasive with the tools that we have. And we also have a contraband detection kit that allows us to essentially dismantle the trap or the vehicle in order to access the contraband. And many of the tools that we use are what you might find in your garage at home. And there are some other pry tools and scopes that we can use that allow us to locate and remove that contraband without causing anyone any harm. We do have a number of troopers assigned in the unit that I'm in, and we have a number of police officers that we proudly train every year that go out on the highways to do what we can to interdict these large amounts of drugs that are killing people in our communities. We're constantly training and obtaining new information, and we're happy to receive information from the public, anything that you can do to help us interdict people that are involved in smuggling contraband in our communities. My email address is right here. I'm happy to receive emails, happy to give you a call if you want to drop me a telephone number, or we'll have somebody else in our unit assigned to your area, make sure that we do everything we can to work together to get these drugs off the street. Reverend Clark, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Yes, the training, do you feel that it's more advanced than any other state in America?
I wouldn't say that it's any more or any less advanced than any other state in America. We all share information. We're one large blue brotherhood. We essentially receive all the same training.
But do you use the same technology or you use more technology?
No, I would say we use the same technology. We all share information. We all share tools. We all share resources. So I would say it's the same as any other state.
Okay, so that the red device tool that you use, you know in advance before you get in the car or stop the car, the activity that's going on in the car?
No, sir. No, that's once we begin to search the car. I'm able to insert this scope just a very small device into cracks and crevices in the car, and we're able to see with the camera inside that area without being intrusive.
Okay. That's great. That's great.
My pleasure. And again, my name is Trooper Gary Knott. I'm assigned to the Northwest Shield Unit. We cover, myself and my colleagues cover every interstate in the Commonwealth. And please drop me a line at gnot@pa.gov if you have any questions. Thank you.
God bless your bones, America. I'm your host, the Right Reverend David Clark, and I'm more than happy to come into your home today to share with you the enlightenment of God's Word. My prayer for you is that God's eternal blessing be manifested in your life as you continue to walk worthy of the vocation wherein ye have been called. Today, my special guest is Dr. Dennis Davey. Today, he's going to give insight, a perspective for all families in America who are being affected by the drug epidemic. And I believe that if you will give your attention to him, that he will give you strategies to affect your family, to show your family how to survive in the moment of this epidemic. Let's receive Dr. Dennis Davey.
Thank you very much, Reverend Clark. It's an honor to be here, everyone, and I appreciate you spending time with us. What I want to talk about today in about 20 minutes, give or take a few minutes, is some of the current trends in alcohol and drug problems, because there's more than an opiate epidemic. There's an alcohol and drug and addiction epidemic, how families are affected, how children are affected, and what we can do to help people. And just a personal story quickly. My father was a World War II veteran, shot by the Japanese, Purple Heart, had a lifelong history of severe alcoholism, depression, and anxiety disorder, but he got sober at age 66 and died sober at age 80. So the good news is it's never too late to change. I grew up in Johnstown, and on my father's side we had a lot of addiction. On his side, not so much on my mother's side. One of 6 kids, 4 had addictions, 5 of us had trouble academically or dropped out of school, 5 of us were juvenile delinquents, 3 spent time in prison. We had lots and lots of problems, which are very common among families in which addiction is a serious problem among parents or other family members. Now, the good news is many family members learn resilience and they learn positive ways of coping. And later today, you're going to hear from a friend of mine, Dominic Marks, who will share some of the strategies he used to cope with addiction in his family with his daughter. So we have high rates of drinking problems in our country. Binge drinking, which is drinking 4 or more drinks per episode for a woman, 5 or more for a man. Heavy drinking, which is multiple binge episodes. And alcohol use disorders, or what we used to call alcoholism, when people lose control, they have a high tolerance, they may develop withdrawal symptoms when they stop and cut down, and they have problems resulting from their alcohol use. For every 1 drug problem in our country, you have at least 2 alcohol problems. So you want to keep that in mind. It's a lot more than an opiate epidemic, as I mentioned before. In the United States, in 2015, almost over 44% of adults used 1 of 4 medicines with addictive potential. Pain medicines, tranquilizers used for anxiety, sedatives for sleep, or stimulants. Over half were not prescribed these. They got them from a family member or a friend. What that tells us is that we're a drug-using society. We also have a significant increase. We have a decrease in prescription opiate use and addiction, but we have an increase in addiction to heroin and fentanyl. Cocaine and methamphetamine are coming back. We have high rates of marijuana use and marijuana addiction. So we have lots of different drug problems in our country. And they have, all these problems have negative effects on the family, its family system, and individual members as well. And the bad news is this is where all of us are important. only about 1 in 10 people with an alcohol drug problem get help. That's far too low. It causes distress in the family, anger, worry, anxiety, disappointment, confusion. People grieve when they lose someone to addiction. Every aspect of the family system can be harmed by a substance use disorder, whether it's opiate or alcohol, doesn't matter. Economic problems, relationships within the family, relationships with the extended family or the community are affected as well. So it's a disease that affects everybody. If you look at people dying, there's a lot of focus on the drug epidemic, and the rates are going down a little bit in 2018, but in 2017 you had over 72,000 people die from drug overdoses, opiates mixed with benzodiazepines, used singly or in combination. But you also had over 88,000 people die from alcohol-related problems, and 500,000 from tobacco or nicotine. So we lose almost 700,000 people directly to the effects of addictive substances. That doesn't count other innocent bystanders who are affected by drunk drivers and things like that. Families lose loved ones. We had a little boy at a vigil light a candle, and he said, "I light this in memory of my dad who died when I was 3." We have, I wrote an article called "Grief Has No Expiration Date," and I interviewed a couple of mothers who lost their adult sons about 4 to 5 years ago, and they're still devastated. They're functioning, and they're doing great things to help other people, but emotionally, it's still very painful. And probably one of the worst stories I've heard is a colleague of mine who, on a nice summer day, was out with her family, and a drunk driver came on the sidewalk, killed her 6-year-old daughter and 61-year-old mother. And the other thing about grief, everyone, is that we not only grieve people who die from addiction, we grieve people who are lost to addiction. They can't function as mothers, as fathers, as responsible family members. So it becomes a central focus of the family. We can evolve around the addicted person. It creates high rates of separation or divorce. With the opiate epidemic, you have more and more people going to foster care. Plus, you have grandparents taking care of their grandchildren. I have 6 grandchildren. I love them. I love them. We have a great time, but I love sending them home. But when you're taking care of your adult son or daughter's children, you can't send them home. And that's not the idea of being a senior citizen or being in retirement that a lot of grandparents have. They love their grandkids and will take care of them, but it's a major emotional and financial burden. You have increased violence, being a perpetrator or a victim of violence when alcohol and drugs are involved. You have high rates of abuse and neglect. Over 70% of cases involved with children youth services involve some kind of alcohol or drug problem. You have less cohesion, more conflict within families. You have family rituals are affected. And the first two are from my family, which says holidays and special occasions always ended up in a big mess. Drunkenness and crazy behaviors. And we never took family vacation. When I got married, my wife was big on vacations. It was a major adjustment for me. I wasn't used to it. I learned to like it. And then also, in my family, my father missed all the graduations and all the weddings, but I think one, and never went to any school events. You know, it's not unique to my family. This happens in a lot of families. And what it says is that the person with the addiction is often impaired, they can't function normally, and then the family system's impaired as well. Economic burden, you have higher rates of poverty. Now, this is important. With all the focus on the opiate epidemic, no one's talking about children affected by addiction. And the University of Pittsburgh has a large research center, and what they find and other researchers find is that if you grow up in a family with an addiction as a child, you have higher rates of alcohol and drug use yourself, higher rates of alcohol and drug problems, mental health problems like depression, anxiety, behavior problems are both, medical problems, academic problems. So children are affected. They don't talk about it necessarily, they internalize it. And they could be doing very well academically, but inside they can be hurting to a great degree. And you also have, with the opiate epidemic, a 3 to 5-fold increase in pregnant women having babies who are addicted, women addicted to opiate drugs. So now the good news is you have over 20-some million people who have a substance use problem every year that we've identified. It's about 8% of the population. But we also have over 20-some million people in recovery. So a lot of people get well. And how do they get well? There's four different ways we help people. One is we help them get their loved one in treatment. Remember, 1 in 10 get help. Now with opiate addiction it's a little bit more, which is good. But clearly, if you have diabetes, if you have clinical depression, there's a good chance you'll get help. If you have an alcohol use disorder, cocaine use disorder, there's a very low chance you'll get help. And people typically don't come asking for help. The three main reasons they get help for a substance problem are pressure from the criminal justice system, the employer, or the family. So families need help getting their loved one into treatment. That's number one. Number two, families need to be involved when possible in their loved one's treatment. Go to group sessions, family sessions, get educated, these sorts of things. Three, and I've seen this a lot in my own practice, family members have higher rates of problems like clinical depression or anxiety. They may need help with that, or they also have substance problems as well. Then the fourth is participating in mutual support programs like Al-Anon, Nar-Anon, Faces and Voices of Recovery, Sage's Army in Westmoreland County, My New Leaf in Boulevard, and Bridge to Hope in Pittsburgh, UPMC East, and up at Pasadena. There's a lot of programs for families. And when we look at the science of outcome of treatment, what we find is that if families get involved in treatment, you have better engagement rates at 10%, it goes up to 60 to 80%. Families get better, the person with the drug or alcohol problem gets better, they reduce or stop their use, they function better, the family improves, their health is better, mental health, all these things can improve if they get into treatment or into recovery. So here are some coping strategies that we try to help families. One is to become educated on all these different areas here, just understanding this stuff. But also, we have a misunderstanding of addiction. We think of addiction as bad behavior, when really, when someone's addicted, their brain is hijacked. So, in a normal day, your brain releases certain chemicals. And there's a chemical called dopamine, which is associated with pleasure or feeling good. And on a normal day, you'll have about 50 nanograms per deciliter, small amount. On a good day, you have twice that amount. So you've all had a good day, you know what it feels like. When drugs are involved, like marijuana, it's 9 times higher. With heroin, it's like 14 times higher. With methamphetamine, it's 19 times higher. So people who use these drugs and who are addicted, their brain becomes used to getting the feeling from the drug, and they can't get the feeling from other things in life. And that's why they have this strong drug hunger that contributes to relapse. So it defies logic. If you have a problem, you usually do something about it. If you have addiction, you're not thinking like that. You're often thinking about, how do I get my next high? How do I get my next drug? We have to look at accepting that it's affected us, and it affects us emotionally. I think I lost my, it affects us emotionally. I'm surprised I haven't tripped yet. Testing? Okay, we're good. Thank you, Reverend. I do have these tendencies for clustering. Now, on a basketball court, I'm sweet, I can play. But walking around and not tripping, forget it. So, it often defies logic, and because of that, we as family members, we do sometimes bizarre things. There was a woman once who made a list. You made a list of things you want to do. She made a list of 100 ways to kill my husband. No, she didn't want to kill her husband. It spoke to how bad she felt and how hurt she felt because of her husband's addiction. I was at a birthday party for a 2-year-old, one of my grandsons. And I sat next to an older guy, actually he was older than me, was talking about his brother, his nephew. And his brother said to his nephew, "Get your Social Security tattooed on your arm so when you die of an overdose, we can identify you." What he was sharing was not his hostility, his hurt, his pain. We don't take it personal. People don't use drugs or alcohol because of us. They do it because they get hooked on it. It controls them. That's why you get people who will lie. You'll say, have you been using? They'll say, no. And they'll be lying to you because they're protecting themselves. You would do the same thing if you were in their shoes. That's the nature of addiction. It controls them. We try to control them. Forget it. It ain't happening. You cannot control a person with an addiction. We can influence them, but not control them. So what do? We try to change our behaviors by not covering up, not making excuses, not bailing people out of trouble unless they agree if we bail them out of trouble to get help. So I can cite you case after case where parents have spent a fortune bailing people out of legal trouble, and then their loved one never got treatment. They just did the wrong thing again. And then the other thing is, and this is hard, this is easier said than done, don't lose yourself in the process. We have to worry about our own health as well. And then we have to worry about our own recovery and self-care. And this is where personal counseling or therapy or mutual support groups that I mentioned may come in. So for example, we want to get support from others. Many of us try to do it on our own. But it's a we program. We help each other out. All you ministers know that you help a lot of people in your ministry because they can't do it themselves. We all need people. People that have social support do better in life with mental illness, addiction, both, or just life in general. We need help from other people. We need support. A big issue for us is reduce the negativity, the anger, the hurt, the pain, and we have to grieve. And it may be grieving a person who's alive. It may be grieving a person who died from an overdose. I know a lot of people who lost young adult children because of overdoses. I know other people who lost loved ones because of car accidents or other medical conditions as well. Very importantly is, and my friend Dominic Marks will talk about this later, I hope, is using mutual support programs. And these are programs like Al-Anon, Nar-Anon, and others. And a recent survey by Al-Anon showed that over 90% felt like going to these support meetings made a significant difference in their life. Significant difference in their life. So these programs do help people. They also have chat rooms and online meetings too to make it more convenient. And then I think in some cases, we get so depressed or so worried or anxious that it goes beyond just feeling bummed out into a clinical condition that maybe we need help as well. And then the last thing I would say is we have to take care of our children. Children are affected by a loved one's addiction. Children are affected by a loved one's addiction. We can't forget the children. We have to focus on them. And we have to accept that they're affected. We have to get them involved in talking. And I have a friend who wrote a book called Same House, Different Homes. And it's about kids can be in the same family. One child can be devastated, one child can be functioning very well. And I've seen this clinically many times. Everyone's not affected in the same way. But having said that, kids are often affected in negative ways. We have to protect the child from violence. And I tell you what, I have I do a talk on grief, and I have slides of where there's a couple kids who were under one who died from drug overdoses because one little boy rolled over and got stuck with a needle with heroin and overdosed. One little 2-year-old drank what he thought was water, was methadone, and died from an overdose. These are ugly things that happen. So we have to protect the child. We want to do normal things at home, share activities. We have to be interested in the child's activities. What are you doing in school? You know, your friends. We want to show an interest. If we're involved in treatment as a family member, with or without the addicted person, we should bring the children in for some sessions as well. They need a voice. And let them talk, let them share. And there was a program years ago at St. Francis called Capers. And a young, very energetic therapist used art for kids. They would draw pictures of what it was like for them. And they would talk about the pictures. And it was just, we actually have a videotape of this. If you hear the stories, it breaks your heart. But the kids have a forum to be listened to. We have to listen to our children. We don't want to assume that because you're not in trouble, because you're doing well in school, you're not affected by your mom or dad's addiction or your brother's addiction. And then I had mentioned before, if you look at the research, we have an increase in problems among children if you have a parent with an addiction. So we want to make sure they get help. So if the child has a mental health problem, an academic problem, a behavior problem, we want to get help. And I would end by saying this, that we all can make a difference. We have to be empathic, we have to be kind, we have to be supportive, and we can't sit on our butts and wait for people to make decisions, because remember what I said about the brain. The brain is addicted, it's hijacked, and they're not going to make decisions that are in their best interest. If we waited for addicted people to make a decision to get help on their own, most would not get help. You saw the numbers, 1 in 10, but most of those got help because of influence of other people. And clearly, we can make a difference. A lot of people get better if they have an addiction, doesn't matter the drug, or if they're family members. So I'd like to thank Reverend Clark for inviting me, and I think this is a great program. Yes, sir.
I noticed that you did not communicate about prescription drug medication being an addictive a problem.
Okay.
And today I understand that more deaths occur as a result as prescription death. Is it because the doctors may be greedy, or is it because the people may be ignorant or innocent of prescription drug use?
Okay.
How does that focus in?
Okay, that's good. So Reverend Clark asked a question about prescription drugs. I had mentioned that 44.5% of adults use one of the 4 addictive prescription drugs: opiates for pain, tranquilizers for anxiety, sedatives for sleep, or stimulants for attention deficit, or sometimes obesity. And most of them get them from a friend or someone on the street or a family member. They don't get them from their doctor. So we do have high rates of misuse and addiction to prescription drugs. If you look at the opiate epidemic, from 2000 to 2013, there was a huge increase in prescriptions. It's gone down, which is good. It's beginning to go down, but it's still very high. Since 2013, you have less people addicted to prescription drugs. Now, what you do have is some people, because of the cost, is they stop the prescription drugs and they buy the illicit drugs on the street. Heroin addiction has doubled in the last half dozen years. So you have that problem as well. So, but the other thing I would say, everyone, is that most people who have a drug problem or an alcohol problem, it's not just one thing. It's not just opiates. It may be opiates and benzo and alcohol. It may be cocaine and marijuana and alcohol. Usually it's multiple substances. And the reason for the fact that we have high rates of prescription is that physicians were told pain's a vital sign and treat it aggressively. And then the pharmaceutical companies, they lied about the addictive potential of opiate medications. So the good news is we're getting better at this. We're using non-addictive medicine for pain, whether it be dental pain or back pain, and we're using non-medication treatments as well. So we're making progress, but we still have ways to go.
Let me ask you this. Do you think there's an increase in users, drug users, during the Democratic season or during the Republican season? Do you find addiction go up? Is there a way to monitor that?
When I think if you look at trends, I mean, the government does annual studies, and it started in the 80s. You saw the trend, it went up, then it went down, when it goes back up. I don't think it has anything to do with Republicans or Democrats. I think it has to do with life, it has to do with your lifestyle, it has to do with availability. So for example, with heroin in some areas, not so much ours, and then methamphetamine, then you had these people delivering drugs to your house, so they'll meet you at McDonald's, they'll meet you in a parking lot. It made it easy to get the drugs, and they were very cheap as well, like black tar heroin. But don't think of this as a drug problem, it's a people problem. People make decisions to use drugs, use alcohol, that over time they may develop a dependency or an addiction or a problem. So we have to think more broadly.
Well, what's going on with Pennsylvania being a national emergency state, opiate emergency state, compared to Montana and compared to other cities down south, states down south. What is it about Pennsylvania that has turned into a national emergency?
Yeah, so the Reverend had talked about we have high rates of problems in Pennsylvania. Lots of things contribute to that. The elderly population is more likely to be using drugs. You have more prescriptions. You have more access to cheaper street drugs. You have more unemployment, like when the steel mills closed and people lost jobs, they became despondent. There's never one simple cause. Many factors contribute to an addiction problem. Now the good news is I think Pennsylvania is improving, because we have a lot of centers of excellence, and we're funded 40 centers of excellence around the state in medical systems, addiction systems, to treat opiate addiction. So we're making good progress, but this is a serious, listen, more people died last year from drug overdoses than during the entire Vietnam War, which is part of my era. I grew up with the Vietnam War, so anyway, so we're making progress, but there's no simple solution. And the problem belongs to all of us. It's high in my family. It's what I've done for my career for decades. So I'm trying to make a difference. We all can make a difference. So thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Dominic Marks, and I'm here today to tell you about my family's travel through my daughter's addiction to substances. This occurred when she was about 14 years of age, and we, as a family, my wife and my son, had to traverse this new terrain that we were on, this new path that we were on, with her, without having a lot of insight into the trials and tribulations that addiction brings upon a family. Folks think of substance abuse as being just about the person that's abusing the substances, whereas in my case, what I found out is substance abuse affects not just the user, but it actually affects the entire family, and it can actually breaks down the entire family. Now, the reason that I'm going to tell you this is my unique story, because every family's story is going to be different. They're not all the same. So what I'm going to tell you today applies to my family, but maybe if you're listening to this and you hear this, you may be able to pull some pieces out that may apply to something that you may be going through, or another member of your family is going through. But I can tell you addiction has touched us all, especially with this latest opioid crisis. We have escalated this to a point of extremes. And I'm going to go through this process using my PowerPoint show here. Oops. There we go. Addiction is not something that it's a fast-moving disease. It's very slow progression. It doesn't come on to you all at once, and you don't notice the sign of addictions all at once because of it's such a slow progressing disease. Like I said, my daughter started out when she was about 14 years of age, and there were many signs of addiction, and they occurred, almost all of them occur, but they occur with a lot of time lapsing in between them. So in our case, while one sign occurs when she was maybe 14 years old, another one didn't occur until she was like 14 and a half years old. The disease also comes in different phases, and I kind of equate the phases to the stages of a storm. And that's probably, from my perspective, a real good way to think about it, because that's how it kind of starts out very slowly and progresses very quickly and gets you very much built up. The signs of the disease are very deniable by the family. And they're very deniable in the sense that you want to be able to rationalize them away, because you really don't want to face the consequences and the propositions of what the disease brings upon you. And it's also that these signs are very forgettable. And again, they're forgettable because of the fact that they are, very much have a lot of time that lapses in between them. Now, like I said, it started out very slowly. So the beginning phases are almost like a light breeze of a storm, like the beginning phase of a storm is approaching to you. There's little things that occur over this time. Suddenly, like for my instance, my daughter's bedroom door started to be closed more often. She's a very open child and shared a lot with us as a family. But then at some point, like around her 14th year, she started closing her door more, and we started, thinking that, okay, she's growing up as a young lady, she wants to have privacy, so again, you can begin to rationalize that. Then she started missing the school bus because she was sleeping in. Again, this was not like one after the other, but these were maybe like another 8, 9 months later, she went through that phase where she started sleeping in. And you just kind of forget what that first one was, the first sign, and even forget the second sign. And then when she was 15, she switched schools, and so she started developing friendships. And that's, again, these friendships were not folks that I would consider to be a very desirable group of people. But, me and my wife raised our daughter, and we instilled some good values in her. And we had told her all along that, she needs to make sure that she introduces those same values to the people that she deals with. That she could, help maybe, bring these individuals up to the value level that she held, and to not bring herself down to that value level. Now, the chaos of addiction continues, and that light breeze at the beginnings of the storm really starts to build up into thunderheads almost. And those clouds really form, and that breeze gets much stronger. And in that phase of the disease, my daughter's grades start to drop. And her grades dropped in her 15 and a half years old, when she was in junior high school, or what they call middle school now. And again, that grade dropping, we rationalized it away as, she was had some more difficult classes to go, to study for. She wasn't really the greatest student in the world. I mean, she was like a C student, but now she was performing at a D level. And that started to concern us somewhat, but, again, as a family, you start to rationalize these items away. Her appearance started to wane. The way she looked and dressed started to, really started to go downhill a little bit. She started dressing more like the friends she was hanging out with. Again, rather than bringing them up to her level, she was starting to move into their level. And then her sick days at school started happening more sporadically. She'd wake up with an upset stomach, or, her head hurt, or something like that. And, it was always something different. And again, these signs of the disease were just months and months apart from each other. Her sleep patterns became inconsistent. She started performing what I call night walks, where she would get up in the middle of the night, and I'm a light sleeper, so I would hear her actually get up, and she would, walk through our house at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I'd hear her in the kitchen, but again, it would be like, well, she's getting up to get a drink or something, and not realizing that as I would fall back asleep, she was actually staying up for a few hours because she couldn't sleep because of whatever substance she was using at that time. I don't know all the substances my daughter was experimenting with. That's something she's never shared with me, and it's really not something that, I look back at and say, oh, I should have noticed this and I should have noticed that. That's not the way that I dealt with the disease as it progressed with her. And then the chaos of the disease becomes full speed. Now this happened more when my daughter hit her 17th, 18th year of life. And it's almost like you're in a spin of a tornado. Again, a great storm analogy. That's whenever money and jewelry began to disappear for us. That's whenever she couldn't hold a job for more than a couple months at a time. And every time she lost her job, it was somebody else's fault. It was never hers. Money went missing in the cash register at work, but it was on her shift, but it wasn't her. She didn't do it. And many people touched that cash register, so it was difficult to, from our perspective, pin the blame on her. She started driving at this point, and of course, automobile accidents started occurring. Minor ones, so to speak, so you attributed those to being a driver. But those accidents started to get more frequent and more than what we thought were normal. And then she started to isolate herself from family and friends. And that was something that kind of concerned us But again, you know, I gotta say at that point, as a family, we were probably in full-fledged denial, and not wanting to face up to the fact that, you know, my daughter had a problem, and she was not dealing with it very well. And at that time, I probably had a good idea myself that she was having an addiction issue, but I just didn't want to have to vocalize that. Vocalizing meant I had to own it, and I didn't want to own that. It was just too difficult to kind of bear and have to think that that was something that we were going to have to deal with. She started sleeping excessively, and her personal hygiene started to decrease. And at that point in time, we were starting to get very concerned because we were afraid of what she might be abusing. We weren't sure at that point if it was alcohol, pills, or if she was using something besides that. And we didn't really want to face up to what it could be, and we sure weren't asking a lot of questions. Of course, we asked if she had problems, but her answer to that question was always that nothing that she couldn't handle it. She was dealing with it. And we were kind of buying into it. Again, we didn't want to get out of that spin ourselves. We were not looking to find a way out of that spin. We were just looking at a way how we can manage her and her disease without jeopardizing her potential for the future of like having a home or having a husband at some point, or being, you know, having children, a family of our own. That was, you know, something that we just didn't want to jeopardize, so we thought we could manage it ourselves. But in this process, one of the things that, looking back, and it's easy for me now to step up here and look back, the family unit began to erode. And the erosion began because we could not connect the dots. We couldn't put two and two together as to how this disease was progressing. And as the disease progressed, we were eroding as a family. It's probably the closest time my wife and me came to, you know, our own differences were so great that we weren't communicating well. My son became invisible. He was no longer a child in the family. He had to fend for himself. As we tried to manage my daughter and her disease that she had. And again, we didn't even know she had a disease. I use that word quite frequently when I'm speaking about it because now I recognize what it is or what it was. But at the time, we were just trying to manage her life for her. Denial, I should say, is a great coping mechanism the family uses. And they use denial primarily so they don't have to confront their fears. And I'll talk about fear a little more later on, but that's kind of what we do whenever we're dealing with this disease. And denial also helps us from not having to vocalize it to our friends and families and neighbors and anybody else that's out there. It gives us the ability to hide ourselves and to, you know, hide what problems she was having so that she wouldn't be brought out into the public view and then lose all these opportunities and potential she could possibly have. Enabling became the new normal within the family. We knew some of the things that she was doing wasn't very healthy, but again, trying to manage it, we would actually end up enabling what she was doing as far as, you know, trying to get money, always needing to be driven around late at night to different friends' homes and dropped off and picked up, or we were taking the car. You know, we knew maybe it wasn't a good idea to give her the car to go out. And again, that's all because the family gets sucked up into this spin of the disease of addiction. And that kind of leads to continuing erosion of the family. This landslide of addiction just consumes the family entirely. Trust at the family level becomes non-existent. Arguments that we had were very commonplace. You know, the communication broke down to where we weren't talking in a positive manner to each other. We were, you know, arguing and confronting and being very negative and, you know, and accusatory at all times. We had animosity and resentment. That became a part of what the dynamics of our family was about, rather than being about loving and caring for each other. As I said before, my son became an invisible person, and he had a lot of resentment towards me and my wife, because I think my son recognized early on that my daughter had an addiction problem, and we were refusing to accept that and recognize it ourselves. And again, I know of many families who've dealt with this, where the bonds of marriage get strained so badly that they actually break. And thankfully, that didn't happen with me and my wife. We found a way to stay together through this. But other families are just quite not so lucky when it comes to that. So what gets left behind the family when you're dealing with addiction? We become like what I term as collateral damage. The family gets so physically, emotionally, and mentally exhausted that they really are a shell of what they used to be as family members and as people. Our love and our respect and togetherness that we had as a family was no longer existed. They just didn't form any longer. They weren't there. And losing all hope for our daughter became more of a reality than as a possibility. So what did we do? We found help. And the help that we found was extending outside the family. We went to an Al-Anon and then an R-Anon meeting, which eventually led us to the Bridge to Hope from a friend that we had that was attending R-Anon meetings with us. And that's what I do now. I'm a member of the Bridge to Hope. I actually sit on the parental advisory board of the Bridge to Hope. I've been going there for 6 years now. And what the Bridge helped me to do was begin to see as a family that we needed to find recovery for ourselves. And as family members also, we attended individual therapy to help us begin to deal with this problem. So the beginning of the journey actually of recovery for the family begins when you say, I'm done. And that's what we did. We vocalized those words in our meeting. And again, once we vocalized them, the members of our group said, you're in recovery now. You're actually beginning recovery from this. Part of the problem of this thing, of addiction, is that it leads to grief for the family. And a family doesn't know they're in grief, but you are suffering a loss. The loss that we suffered was of our child's future, of our child's ability to take care of herself going forward. And we didn't understand that we were in the phases of grief, and we went through all of them. And then finally, the last phase of grief, which is acceptance, was the one that helped us to start to begin our own recovery. And again, that actually starts in that final phase of grief, is that acceptance piece. Now, again, is it a disease or a choice? Well, you can go with either answer. It is a choice originally to begin using whatever substance or alcohol somebody uses, but then it quickly turns into a disease of no choice. It is actually, factually, and medically defined and documented brain disease. And part of acceptance is understanding that your loved one has a brain disease that they're going to have for the rest of their lives, for which there is no cure for. And that was something that, again, helped me once I began to research that and find it out on my own. That was something that led me to begin to find a recovery for myself and my family. Another thing we had to learn was that what I call the 3 C's. We didn't cause the disease, we couldn't control the disease, and we couldn't cure it. We had to accept all those 3 items. Because without accepting those 3 items, you're still trying to battle the disease, and you actually end up getting in the way of recovery for your loved one. So you have to accept these premises in order to move forward as a family. So what controls a family when you're in this spin of chaos? I mentioned that earlier, it's fear. And that was one of the things that we had to begin to do also, was understand and control our fears that we had about what my daughter's addiction could possibly lead to. Again, there's that fear of them losing everything and all the potential that life could pose to them. And ultimately, there's the number one fear that everyone has for somebody who's in addiction, that is death. So we had to come to grips with that ultimate fear as a family. One of the ways that we came to grips with that was learning a new way to love our daughter. When you're loving your child, when you raise your child, you think of them as always having to fix their problems for them and their wounds. And so as a parent, you do that. You nurture them and you help them and you fix things for them. Unfortunately, with addiction, those are things that you can't do. And that's the things that slow down the progress of addiction and coming to a road of recovery for the person who's abusing. We had to learn that we no longer could enable my daughter. We had to become a helper for her. And our help had to be in the sense of helping her find recovery rather than enabling her disease for her to stay in that disease. And that's something we had to learn in the Bridge to Hope process. We learned how to begin each manipulation that she tried to throw at us, and people who are in addiction are great manipulators. We began each response to manipulation with, I love you, but I can't, because I love you. And that was hard for my daughter to argue with us about, because that disarms her. And our communications became more supportive. It's more supportive towards finding recovery rather than staying in addiction. And that was things that we had to adapt as a family. And that helped us, again, find our own recovery. We had to find things that brought us as a family peace and happiness that we had prior to my daughter being in addiction. I know I consulted an addiction therapist, so did my wife, and my son went to a therapist on his own also. And we continue to find group support, again, with us through the Bridge to Hope, and we developed our own we. And our we is our members of the Bridge to Hope that we have as our outside family. They pretty much really helped us get through this process. We had to learn to work and manage our own recovery, and not my daughter's. My daughter's recovery, and she did find recovery eventually, had to be hers to manage. That we couldn't do that for her. We had to take care of our own. And we never had to lose hope. That was the thing. Losing sight of hope was something that happened to us that led us to finding help. But we had to understand that we couldn't give up on hope. So we had to keep that always in the forefront of our minds. Now, it didn't happen right away when we started attending a group therapy that, my daughter found recovery. The group therapy gave us strength to help start taking care of us, which led us to do things that stopped enabling our daughter, which eventually led to her recovery, which wasn't, a smooth road in itself, but ultimately did become a more predominant way of life for her. So why do family members need to work recovery? We need to take ourselves out of the chaos. We have to get ourselves out of it, because when you're in the chaos, you can't process correctly, you can't think correctly. And then finding your own recovery, getting with a group or a therapist, really does give you that opportunity to stop, analyze the situation, and begin to think of it differently. We had to better position ourselves to help our loved one, my daughter in this case, with their recovery, and how we would help them. And I think of it as the plane analogy. If the plane's going down and the oxygen masks drop, they always tell you put the oxygen on your face first before you put it on your child. And what we were doing prior to that was we were putting it on our child and not putting it on us. So we had to switch that around to where we took care of ourselves. And by taking care of ourselves and learning how to progress ourselves through this, through addiction, she eventually came along with us. She was getting left behind as a family member. We had to educate ourselves about the disease, and I immersed myself in education about it, about how it affected the brain, what it did to an individual. And we had to recognize and remove the stigma. The stigma of addiction is what led us to try to hide the disease from family and friends. I come out like this and speak on numerous events on a consistent basis because I'm trying to remove that stigma of addiction that family members have. Unless we bring this out to the forefront, unless we talk about it, unless we recognize it as a community, it will continue to grow and stay embedded within our communities. So we have to step forward and be willing to expose ourselves to say, hey, look, I'm dealing with addiction in my family. And believe me, most people in this world are dealing with addiction in their family. There's over 25 million addicts in this country, and out of 25 million people dealing with alcohol or substance abuse, every one of them has family members. And if you say that, a family can have anywhere from 4, to 5 people in a family, including grandparents, maybe aunts, uncles, you can go higher than that number. You can get up into the number of people affected by addiction where it's close to more like 175 to 200 million people, and there's only 360 million people in the country. So more people than not are somehow being affected by this disease, and that's the one thought I'd like to make sure people take away from this is that you're not alone. That more people than not are sitting out there with you who are exposed to disease. And when you end up talking about it, you'd be surprised at the people you're talking with, how they speak up and say, you know what, I have a brother, or I have a child, or I have a parent that suffered with that also. The other thing we learned was no longer be a victim of addiction. We had to more than become a survivor. We had to become a warrior and thriver from addiction. That's what the role I took on for myself. I became that warrior, which is what leads me here today and to many events that I speak at. To be that warrior to say, this is what we need to do as individuals to improve ourselves so that we can better battle this disease and take care of ourselves and hopefully eradicate it, because we are 50% of the problem of addiction. While the state and federal governments focus on the user and the families are not as much the primary focus, families are half of the problem and also half of the solution. And that's one of the things that I think we're going to move forward with as a state government and federal government gets more involved. The focus is going to end up starting to move towards the families also, because they're starting to recognize that too, that families are part of the solution of the problem as much as the user is. I have 12 steps that I follow, and I get 12 steps from 12-step programs that NA and AA provide to users out there that maybe they attend, but I also have 12 steps that I follow, and I got those off of the internet. They're actually for sponsors, but they actually really help me manage myself going forward, so I don't forget what I have to do to keep myself in recovery and to also help my daughter maintain hers. And those 12 steps I have, and I'd be willing to share with Reverend Clark, and he can maybe keep those for you at some point. If anybody sees this, they can get their hands on that from him. What I discovered from this whole process and what my family's discovered is that my support group, Bridge to Hope, keeps me centered. That's why I still go. Even though my daughter's found recovery, and she's been in recovery now for almost 5 years, I need that to stay centered. So if a relapse occurs with my daughter, I'm ready to better deal with that, both myself and my wife and my son. We've learned not to villainize our user. In the beginning we did. That's where like animosity and resentment comes from. And we've learned that that is not something that we need to do. She doesn't want to be an addict. Nobody grows up and in their mind thinks to themselves, someday I want to be an addict. And so that's what we had to begin to recognize, that this is not something she wanted to bring upon herself, it just happened. We learned to have more compassion and empathy for those who struggle. And we need to always bring that into our lives. In the beginning, that was a hard thing to come across because, again, there's so much resentment there. There's so much, animosity towards what they're going through and what they've done to the family, that having compassion and empathy is a lesson on your mind, but we have to learn to bring that to the forefront and help us, again, better help her by showing that. And I had to learn to live the day with my youth. Just like my daughter goes to live a day-by-day kind of life, that's the same thing I have to do, is live day by day. I'm not going to look forward to the future and the things that may bring me, but I also know that every day that I have is a blessing to be with. And I'm grateful for every day that I have. And for every day that I have with my daughter and her sobriety is a blessing. And with my family, as we deal with her sobriety, is a blessing. And I learned not to set long-term goals for my daughter. She does that herself. Her goals are her goals. I can't do those for her because all those do is set you up for disappointment if they're not met. And that's something that her goals, she sets, I'm just happy she has them. As a family, as my family and I progressed in our recovery, Our daughter recovery has also become stronger. And that's something that a lot of families don't get to do and to have. And finally, we never lost hope. We could never give up. We thought we lost it, but really it went back burner, it came back up, and that really is what carried us through this whole process. And that's the one thing I'd like to deliver to other folks out there, is never lose your hope. Thank you, Reverend Clark, for giving me this opportunity, and I do appreciate this chance that I had to be a part of your event today.
I do have a question.
Sure.
Manipulation. How long did it take you to recognize, every member of the family recognize that your daughter had learned some strategies of manipulation?
You know, it's funny, they learn those strategies of manipulation very quickly, because typically the folks that are hanging out there are also users. So manipulation processes are very much a shared by word of mouth kind of a learning phase. For us, it's not a matter of recognizing manipulation as much as going along with manipulation. You know, you can recognize it for what it is, but if you don't go along with it, then your only other recourse is to confront it. And again, that was a very difficult thing to do when you're trying to deny what's happening.
Yes. How do you confront it when you know about the denial?
Yeah.
You know that that's part of it.
Yeah, you learn about denial, you learn about being, and I really don't like the word enabling, but I can't think of a better word, but that's what we do as family members. We do enable until we learn differently. And again, my group helped me recognize how I was enabling my daughter and recognize how I was being manipulated. And they taught me the strategy, and I learned the strategy of how to turn around and face manipulation with, I love you so much, I can't do that. I can't give you that $25 you need. I can't give you the keys to the car tonight. I love you so much, I can't do that. And when you phrase it that way, it becomes a very difficult point to argue. Because what can they say? Don't love me?
Yes, they can say that.
Yeah, they can, but you know they don't mean that.
Yes.
You know, and that's I guess that's the whole point. You just keep saying it enough, they know that, you know, that they don't really mean don't love me.
Well, I have members in the church, and they may not say manipulation, they just say use. You know, my son, my daughter is using everybody in the family
Yes.
who show compassion for her. You can dress it up any way you want to dress it up, but confrontation and denial seem to be a problem.
Yeah, and that's that part of not understanding what you're dealing with.
Okay.
You know, not understanding that when, you know, it's hard when you look at your family member, you see them. I mean, for as long as you've known them, if it's from a small child to now being an adult, you see them for what you know them before this all started. And what you don't understand as an individual is how the disease of addiction works. When somebody gets involved in addiction to the point where they have used for a number of months to where they're addicted at this stage, their brain stops developing. So if, for instance, like my daughter's addiction became very heavy when she was about 15, 16, her brain stopped developing at that stage. Even though at 22, she was still, you know, having issues, she was still a drug addict at that point, I thought I was talking to a 22-year-old, and I'm talking to a 15-year-old. And so it's very difficult to see that you're not talking to a 22-year-old. The other thing
You need a therapist.
Yes.
To train your mind,
Yeah, it's either, like I say, either a therapist or finding a good group to belong to that just can help you and coach you through the process. We don't like to, in our group, we don't like to give advice on, we like to share our experiences and let the person who has the crisis at hand or is dealing with an issue to choose from the experiences that they're hearing and decide what's best for them, how it works best for them. Because some things, that one person does, another person can't do. They just can't see themselves doing certain things. Like when my daughter got to the point where we discovered she was using heroin, we had to ask her to leave the home. One of the things I could not ever envisioning was coming home from work and finding her dead in my house from an overdose. In my mind, I come to the acceptance of if she's going to overdose someplace, I'd rather get a call from the coroner or the morgue and come down and identify her body rather than find her at home. I couldn't live in my house anymore. Everybody has to find their breaking point.
Let me ask you one more question. How did prescription drugs work with her addiction?
Yeah, that was the beginnings for her. That was actually the beginnings. Now, of course, when she was in high school, I think she had experimented with drinking, but drinking was never her thing. She never liked drinking. But she had her wisdom taken out when she was about 15. And when they gave us painkillers for her, she's already hanging out with a group of kids that, were experimenting with pills. And, of course, she relayed to them that she had painkillers, and they kind of helped her learn how to abuse them. And so that started on the road. Now, I had addiction in my family prior to this, and that's the genetic component of this disease. My grandfather was an alcoholic. Unfortunately, I never knew that until I was about 40. Because he died when I was only like 13 years old. I never knew he died because of alcoholism. Family didn't share that. Again, it's a part of that thing you just don't want to talk about those things. But yeah, pills were a beginning for her, and it ultimately led her from, I think she started out using Vicodins, and then she started using Xanax, and ended up going to OxyContins. And again, OxyContins come in various strengths. She started out very small in dosage, ended up getting the highest dosage possible until it became unaffordable for her. Whenever we started cutting off the money supply for her, she could no longer hold a job. She had to turn to something else which was cheaper, and of course that's heroin. And that was, for me, that was like playing a game of Russian roulette daily for her. Had to put an end to it for me. And again, I would never recommend to anybody out there that putting your child out of your home is the recourse. You have to be able to live with whatever you do. And that was, I had to live with that. My wife and I both had to come to that decision, and we had to live with, hopefully she finds recovery. Maybe she wouldn't. But thankfully my daughter did find it. She started her recovery not long after that. Within a matter of a couple of weeks, she was in a rehab. Now, she didn't do well after that rehab. She didn't do well after her first couple of rehabs. But then she did find recovery. And this has been the one she's on now for the last 5 years. And she's now married. Let's see, her and her husband, who's also in recovery. He has about 6 years of recovery right now. They have a business that they've started, and it's doing very well. They surprised me beyond belief. If you had told me 6, 7 years ago that this is what she'd be doing today, I was getting ready to bury my daughter, not seeing what she's doing now. That's why every day is a day of being grateful for me.
Thank you kindly for participating in our recovery conference. It has been quite beneficial, and I'm sure those who view this particular presentation will benefit by it.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.